Let me call on Senator Ensign, the ranking member of the subcommittee, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this very, very important hearing. And before I start, I see our colleague from Louisiana here, and you folks who have, and all the folks in the Gulf Coast, just know that our thoughts and our prayers are with you. I know this is an unbelievably difficult time, and most of us in the country are just seeing it on television, but you all are living it out in your day-to-day lives, and our thoughts and our prayers are with you. Other committees in both the House and the Senate have conducted numerous hearings on a wide array of issues relating to the oil spill. These have ranged from determining what caused the explosion, what the environmental impacts will be, and if anything could be done to prevent further disasters like this happening in the first place. Also, Admiral Allen has provided numerous very detailed briefings regarding the status of the leak, how many barrels are being captured, and the extent of the spill's impact. I hope to get something different and unique out of this hearing. This subcommittee was designed for a very specific purpose, and that is to examine if the state and localities are getting what you need from both the federal government as well as from the private sector. Additionally, I want to prove and see if there are various levels of government working together cohesively and jointly, or in military terms as a total force. We need to find out if there are other assets which the states and localities need and have not been provided by either BP or the federal government. We need to identify here today what those gaps are, figure out what is the best way to fill them, and then begin to figure out how to proceed down that path. I also hope to hear what BP and others in the oil industry and the private sector are doing to aid the cleanup efforts. My good friend from Arkansas and I have worked together on numerous issues and pieces of legislation in a bipartisan fashion during our time here in the Senate. And if we identify here today any additional congressional action that is required, I know, and this committee has worked very well in a bipartisan fashion, I know we'll do what is required, and our staffs will work together to get that accomplished. This hearing was designed in a very specific way. The states and localities were intentionally put on the first panel so that we could hear from you and force the federal and private sector entities to listen to what is needed. Some specific questions and issues I'd like to see raised and addressed are as follows. Are there adequate resources for the cleanup? Do we have enough skimmers in the water? Is there enough boom? My understanding is that Alabama has only 2 skimmers and not enough boom. Will the federal government need to procure more of either? If we have other skimmers in our inventory, why are they not currently in the Gulf working? As a matter of fact, I was just watching television this morning about a private sector company that says that they can produce up to 90,000 feet of boom a day, and they haven't gotten BP to approve that yet, and that's one of the issues that we want to explore this morning. I'd like to get to the bottom of the sand berm barrier islands that were requested by Louisiana. What was the delay in getting these approved? Was determining who would pay for the barrier islands berms a major stumbling block? Do we have the necessary manpower on the beaches and the waters helping to clean up the ecosystem? News stories over the past few days indicate that the manpower down there is still inadequate. And I, for one, would be open to sending, if we need to, the National Guard resources down there to assist. Is this something that would help? Perhaps this is something that Congress can help with. I'd like to also hear what the rules are for cleaning crews. I've heard reports the locals are upset because cleaning crews are only allowed to work 20 minutes out of every hour. Is this accurate? And if so, why are these rules in place? And finally, I want to find out more on the new effort to collect and review oil spill response solutions from scientists and vendors. What can we hope to see come from the Interagency Alternative Technology Assessment Program, and what hurdles may complicate and hamper effective response technologies? These are all important issues that need to be addressed, and I hope we can get to at least some of these today, and if not, more of them in the coming weeks. And again, Mr. Chairman, I thank you very much for holding this hearing.
Thank you. Senator Lieberman. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Senator Ensign and let him ask some questions.
Well, thank you. First of all, I want to thank all of you for your testimony, and as emotional as you got, I actually thought you were pretty restrained, and I didn't hear any expletives, and I can understand. I'm sure you've uttered a few of them out there, but and it's quite understandable. Can somebody walk me through, who has to approve the berms? I guess that was the federal government had to approve the berms, and it took the president. Who has to approve more of the boom? Who has to approve the suction, these suction units that you guys have shown on shore, maybe to put them on the barges to get them going? Walk me through some of these approval processes, because it sounds like you're having trouble knowing who approves.
Our Coast Guard man on the ground says he can approve it, but then he looks to BP, and it goes through the BP chain of command. I think when we scream loud enough and it gets up to Admiral Allen and it gets the president's ear, the Coast Guard pulls the trigger. And if funding is a problem, early on in a conference call with Admiral Allen's assistant and Mary Landry from the Coast Guard, they told me the reason they wouldn't approve the berm, they didn't think it would do enough good to keep the oil out, number one, and number two, because of the cost, and they had limited funds for this recovery. And that scared me. And it shouldn't be limited funds. We should be making BP put the money up. And so, you know, we should be throwing everything in the kitchen sink at this. And same thing with the skimmers. There's 100 skimmers in a warehouse, but they're not through BP's contractor, and we're playing hell trying to get those things out there to pick up this oil before it gets to Florida and other states. It's sitting out there, and nobody's picking it up.
You're probably asking the same question I am right now, is why doesn't Thad Allen just make it happen and then worry about billing, you know, BP later? I mean, BP has said, you know, they've said publicly many times that they're willing to pay for the cleanup, they're willing to pay and do everything and do it right. And if we're going to hold them to their word, why isn't Admiral Allen doing that?
These armed skimmers that can get on ships and go out there and pick this up, until they were embarrassed at a public meeting, and the commander from New Orleans Coast Guard took him on the side, and I think they ordered one, whether it was to shut this guy up or whatever. But there's all kind of equipment that could pick all this oil up offshore before it gets to Florida, and that's the crime. We were out there, and we rode for 3 hours the other day through thick oil like that all along the Outer Barrier Islands, and it's coming ashore somewhere. And we're doing nothing.
Well, it's similar to, you know, you hear today that BP can't pick up as much oil. Their ship that they have out there, you know, can't handle all the oil that's being, you know, sucked up. And I'm thinking to myself, this has been going on 52 days now. Why isn't there at least another ship or whatever they need in the area? It's going to cost them a lot more if this stuff comes ashore and gets into those marshes for the environmental cleanup. It just... I mean, I don't know what the thinking is for BP, but they don't seem to be thinking right.
There may have been a start when the new guy in charge, Bob, came down, and we took his hand and stuck it in the oil, and he felt it, and asked him, what do you think that feels like on the back of a Pelican? He seemed to get it, and that was just the other day. Maybe we'll see some changes, but until you see and go out there and see what it's doing, it scares the hell out of you.
Maybe when you have trouble getting something approved, we should just put some BP executives in the oil until they approve it.
I made that recommendation to Haywood. I told him when he said there was no large sections of oil under the water, Jacques Cousteau's son went for an hour and a half and couldn't find the end of a large section offshore. I suggested we take him out there and throw him overboard and see if that black stuff dripping off of him. But it's serious enough. Look at that picture. We were out for 3 hours the other day with the new guy in charge of BP, and I said, what do you not see out here? Right. He said, fishing boats. I said, what else? Skimmers. Not a one. Baratier Basin, one of the most richest, where all those pelicans are nesting, that we are out, our crew's out there every morning. We can't pick up boom, but we can put it out. So we're putting it out every day. They're not picking up the oily stuff. So we just keep adding to it. That oil in Baratier Bay is going to destroy all of the nesting ground for the pelicans. And there's no skimmers out there yesterday or the day before or the day before that.
Mayor, you.
Yes, sir. Day before yesterday, around 5 o'clock in the evening, before my council meeting, I got some of my shrimpers was off of Britain Sound, which is on the eastern side of the Malta River. 25 of them. It's what does BP puts them in a task force. About 25 fishermen in a task force. Out of the 25, I have 8 of them from Grand Isle, and the rest is neighboring parish, which is Lafourche Parish. They had no signal on their phones, So one of them climbed up the mast and called me, and he said, I want to come home. I've been gone for 5 weeks. I'm watching television, and I'm watching the 5 passes where I make a living at. He said, the fishermen want to come home, work their territories. Mr. David, can you please bring us home? There's no all here. We're just, maybe between the 25 of us in the last 8 days, we picked up maybe a quart of oil. But every night we lay in the bunks of our boat. They make us anchor out at 6 o'clock in the evening, shut down. Apparently, BP doesn't believe that oil moves at night. Shrimping works 24 hours, 24/7. They left their families, and they're scared. They're scared to tell the BP representative that we need to go to Grand Isle, we need to go where the oil's at. We want to go save our community, and we'll run back. Now, the Task Force 5 or 6, might be Task Force 7, is on behind the island, is from Venice, Louisiana. So we're trying to work it out where the locals can maybe work in the areas. But in the bottom line, looking at a picture like that with Billy and I for 3 hours, the BP representative that rode in the boat with us, just picture you or your son or your grandson playing ping pong. And there's about 500 balls coming to you with one paddle. That's what it looks like coming through them passes. 500 streams of that type of oil coming, and there's only one shrimp boat that's fighting it.
Just one last comment. Just sounds like to me, based on everything I'm hearing, that the local folks, you know your area the best, you know the solutions the best, and obviously more of that command and control needs to happen on that bottom up, as you guys talked about. And perhaps like even what we did, Mary and Senator Landrieu, during the war, we had local CERP funds for the local commanders on the ground. Perhaps we need to, set up something like that so that you guys don't have to go to Fat Allen. You don't have to go have the president come down to get some of these things, because it sounds like you have a lot of the solutions that could prevent a lot of this stuff from happening.
Thank you. Senator Landrieu. Senator Ensign.
Yeah, I have 2 quick questions. One is just for this committee's sake, to clear up the idea, the berms and the barrier islands. I know that some of them have been approved. Is that all the ones that you need approved? Do you need more approved?
Yes, sir.
What's the process?
Yes, sir. In your booklet, you have a copy of the plan. In red is the ones not approved, and greens are the ones that are approved. And
why are ones not approved?
It's a good question. The Coast Guard, the Corps of Engineers is still answering questions about the environmental impact of current flows and ridiculous questions. But we hope to get started on these 6 and have them approved before these 6 are finished so they can move right to them. Because you wouldn't build half a levee. We've got to build the whole thing to keep it out. And if I could make a statement.
I mean, isn't that a huge, this isn't a small, it's a huge issue.
Absolutely.
Preventing this getting to the marshes, isn't it?
If we would have built it when we asked for it, those pelicans that died, the first berm was going in front of that island. We would have collected all that oil offshore, and those 400 plus pelicans that are dead, that rookery, that would have been protected. And if that doesn't teach us something.
Just to be clear, this isn't something that BP can do. This is the federal government has to approve these.
Well, the federal government made BP pay for them.
Right.
And after the president went out there, the president of BP saw it, he agreed to pay for it.
Okay. And then the last question has to do, Ms. Cooper, on the National Guard. I think your governor's request is 6,000 additional National Guard. What's the status on that, and kind of what would they be doing?
And I haven't got the exact number, but it's over 1,000 have been deployed, and they're doing a number of things. And I have to tell you that they are and I think you guys will agree with me, are the heroes in this response.
Absolutely.
As well as these gentlemen to my right. And they're doing a number of things. They're assisting in building land bridges, and you've seen some of the pictures from that. They're assisting in.
But you need a lot more down there is the bottom line.
Well, I think and one point I want to make, if I could, to keep in mind, and this was brought up, is that we are in the middle of, not in the middle of hurricane season, we're starting hurricane season, and we've talked about not having enough resources and personnel to respond to this. If a disaster, if we're unfortunate for a hurricane to come hit Louisiana or any of the coastal states, it's going to go further into the marshland, it'll go further into the other states that have been mentioned, and if there are not enough resources and personnel at this point, how can we have the assurances there are going to be enough after a hurricane?
Okay.
And that's something. But what I say is that, and that's where the National Guard. I mean, they're basically the go-to guys at the state level, at the local level, if any needs that are unmet, and they're doing a number of things. And they certainly would take on more of a role after a hurricane, to assist.
They took the vacuum trucks out there to kind of embarrass BP into paying for them. They're out there vacuuming up the oil right now. The National Guard is.
They're dropping sandbags or filling sandbags, as he indicated. They're coming up with technologies, new technologies, and talking about using barges and putting vacuums. That was a Guard idea. That's my understanding.
How important are the berms also for the hurricane season?
Well, absolutely. If we get a tropical storm, it'll pick this oil up, bring it inland in the middle of hours, and it'll drop it across coast and destroy all the marsh all at once. We altered a coastal plan to make these berms that would give us, they were small enough yet big enough to give us at least a fair chance of keeping that oil out of our marshlands.
Well, I hope the administration is listening so that they can get some people on this and get those approved as quickly
And sir,
as
if I
possible.
could, one other thing. It's just not the parishes that have been impacted to date. It's the parishes to the west that we're looking at protective measures that need to be approved so that if a hurricane does come through there, that they're protected as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions. One is, when plans were supposed to be in place and nobody said worst case scenario could ever happen, worst case scenario beyond worst case scenario has happened. What is the federal government's assessment now of really the worst case scenario? Going around Florida, going up the East Coast, what is the complete worst case scenario, and what is the federal government's plan for that worst case scenario?
You want to start?
Sir, our approach to the worst case scenario would continue to be to get the resources out there. And as you've indicated, when you get beyond scenarios that have been contemplated, we're reaching out globally to pull maximum number of skimmers and vessels that can remove oil from the water out there. We will continue to bring a global fire boom to do the in situ burning, and just continue to increase the resources on the water and try and get this under control while it's still in the Gulf of Mexico and moving the way it's been moving. If the loop were to open it up, we would consult with our NOAA advisors that are on our team to see where that oil would go and how much might go and what form it would be in.
The reason I asked the question is it seems like the worst case keeps happening. I think we should be assuming worst case. And why aren't those kinds of resources being brought to bear right now? In other words, why aren't resources coming in? Wouldn't it be a lot better to prevent the worst case scenario from happening with a lot more resources? I mean, we keep hearing about the lack of skimmers. We hear about the lack of resources, not enough boom, too slow of an approval process for the berms, all of those things happening. Instead of just thinking, well, maybe the worst case and we'll have to react to it then, why aren't we trying to bring everything in now? You just said, well, then we would call in global resources. Why aren't we bringing those global resources in now?
I may have misspoken. We are. We are working on bringing all global resources to bear on this, and at the same time continuing to work at the source. There's two wells being drilled to cap this well leak. There's also a dispersant applied. It's an innovative application down near the source that uses much less dispersant, breaks the oil up so less wildlife will ultimately be impacted. And also we're bringing skimmers from around the world in vessels to operate those, and that is going forward, sir.
Senator, if I could say on that point, so the potential, for example, of the oil hitting the loop current has been something we've been talking about for about 3.5 weeks, and it's such a delayed response in many ways because you're sort of waiting to see what happens. In anticipation of that, we have worked with all the states up to Maine in terms of the Coast Guard has worked operationally. We've worked intergovernmentally to say the first things first, look at your area contingency plan. We were surprised the extent to which a lot of folks didn't know they had one and didn't know what it said. So look at it now to determine whether it is protecting the areas you want protected in terms of priorities, and is utilizing all the resources of the federal government, federal, state, and local government. And so that's our first message to them. A lot of these things, we have a lot of boom on being ordered, a lot of it coming aboard, working with a lot of countries for global orderings. One of the challenges here is, for example, can't put boom out before the oil's there or before the oil could get there quickly because it will get damaged. We've already seen it with boom that's already in the Gulf. So some of this is just anticipating capacity and anticipating and the federal government informing the states and localities in terms of what we might anticipate if it hits the loop current, for example.
Senator Landrieu.
Thank you.
Senator Ensign.
Can you just walk us through, when you say documentation, what kind of documentation they need?
So let me take you through the documentation for a deckhand. And this has been an issue in Louisiana, particularly in the office that I was directly involved in opening in Venice, where in some cases deckhands don't have a tax return. So we've tried to make our process as pragmatic as possible with a bias to getting money into folks' hands. So if you don't have a tax return, we'll take a payroll stub. If you don't have a payroll stub for the month or for every 2 weeks, we'll take a deposit slip that shows how much you've made. If you don't have a deposit slip, we'll take fish tickets or trip tickets. In the case of a deckhand, we'd also make a quick call to the captain of the boat that you work on to confirm that you actually work on that boat, and get a very simple letter from the captain saying that you work on the boat. All of that happens. The person walks out of the claims office with a check. In the case,
these are $5,000 checks, or these $2,500?
These are the $2,500 checks.
Okay.
That have been given out.
And how long is that supposed to last them?
This will last as long as people are damaged by the spill.
No, I mean, in other words, can they just do that one time?
Absolutely. You do it one time, and as a matter of fact, last week we started rolling out the second wave of checks for the month of June to the same people who received compensation in May.
Okay, so that's $2,500 for the month. Is what they're getting.
Yes.
What about if you're a small business owner?
If you're a small business owner,
yeah.
If your claim is less than $5,000, it's a very simple process and it's settled relatively quickly. If it's larger than $5,000, it goes into our large loss claims process. That process is actually just spooling up because in order to declare a loss as a business for the month, we need it for the books to close for the month of May. So we started paying large loss claims last week. Last week we paid about 40 of those claims. The smallest one was just over $5,000. The largest one was $426,000.
So are you comparing year to year? How are you comparing that?
In the case of small businesses, we ask for tax returns for 1, 2, or 3 years, depending on the complexity of the claim, in addition to a P&L.
P&L for the previous year? So
for the previous year and by month if necessary, because in many cases, these businesses are seasonal. So whatever is the appropriate lens to look through.
And what happens if these businesses, a lot of small businesses are already hurting in this country and they go out of business in the meantime?
10% of all of the claims that, let me back up, 5% of all of the claims that we've received to date have been from businesses that have claims in excess of $5,000. Around 600 of them were sent checks immediately for $5,000, and their claims were put into the process. We're going to ramp that process up quickly to make sure we get hands into those businesses as fast as we can.
And I know some of these questions you may not be able to answer, Mr. Dempsey, but take your best shot if you can. If not, we'd like written responses. For instance, we've understood that President Obama and your CEO have not met during this time. Is that correct?
Senator Ensign, I have read that, and I understand that is the case.
Do you know whether your CEO, and if not, if you can get that question to us, whether if the President hasn't reached out to your CEO, if your CEO has reached out to the President, if you can get that for us? I would appreciate that.
I will.
Secondly is that the May 27th, there was an ABC News report that said that BP refineries, and I'm quoting, have a systemic safety problem. And bottom line is BP had 760 OSHA violations at various refineries. Exxon had only one. Do you have explanations why you would have so many and other companies would have so little?
Senator, I can't represent the safety records of other parts of our
You could maybe
organization.
get your company to get that answer for us.
Okay.
That would
Will.
be very much appreciated. And lastly, we have a situation where the local. You heard from the local folks up here saying that they get the answers from the Coast Guard. Coast Guard says, they get approval from the Coast Guard. Coast Guard then says BP won't pay. And yet BP is consistently, you said it again today, will pay all, the cleanup process and all that, and that's what they're largely talking about today. How do you respond when you heard, because you guys were sitting here, when you heard some of these local folks talking about, they're pretty heavily pointing the finger at you guys and charging you guys that you're not doing the job that you've promised to the American people and to the people of the Gulf Coast that you were going to do?
Senator, I understand the frustration of the gentleman from the first panel. This is a tragic and unprecedented event. I believe that the command structure is actually quite clear. Admiral Tad Allen is the National Incident Commander. All decisions about the tactics, the resources, and the efforts to address this spill are ultimately under his decision-making authority. I believe that the Unified Command is an important cooperative effort between the United States Coast Guard, BP, and associated state and local agencies. It is.
So if Thad Allen says BP pay that, you're going to pay it.
I was encouraged to hear in the testimony from Rear Admiral Nash that to his knowledge and from his experience, there have been no incidents where BP has not been prepared to cover the requirements of resources for this response. BP is fully committed to deploying the full resources of our company towards this response.
Do you think it's being done in a timely fashion? Does BP think that they're doing these things in a timely fashion? There's one thing to say yes. There's another thing to say yes in a timely fashion when the actual money for whatever is being done can happen and be effective.
Senator, I'll assure you that BP is not delaying the delivery of resources to support this response. Mm-hmm. It is important to note that in the Unified Command structure, there is indeed a decision-making process. As a part of that Unified Command, we have to operate within that process, and we are supportive of providing all the resources necessary to address this spill.
Are the work rules that we heard about today, the 90 degrees, we've heard press reports, if it gets 90 degrees, people have to take breaks all the time. You heard these folks talking about it today. They're in a war down there. Mm. And is BP setting up those work rules, or is the Unified Command, is Thad Allen setting up those work rules?
Senator, I'll reinforce that all the decisions about the operations, the tactics that are being employed.
When you hire a contractor, is BP or is the Unified Command setting up, okay, when it gets over 90 degrees, you got to take, a certain amount of time. You can only work 10 minutes at a time. Things like that we read about in the press. Who is making who is setting those kind of rules up?
Senator, I'd like to reinforce that there's a really critical priority we hold, which is to ensure the safety and the health.
That's not the answer to my question. My question is, who's setting the rules? Is it BP or is it the Unified Command?
It is indeed Unified Command, Senator. It is their accountability to direct the resources that are being deployed in this response.
I know that. I'm saying the actual work rules themselves. Who's setting that up? Like if somebody can only work, 10 minutes at a time or 20 minutes at a time, whatever those rules are, who is setting those rules?
Senator, Unified Command makes those decisions. They are subject to and very focused on guidance from OSHA, Departments of Health, and other associated state and federal authorities.
That's what I needed. Thank you.